this month's webinar is an exciting one, and hopefully people that are attending can find it very informational. And if at least you take away kind of one thing that you can implement in your operation moving forward, then I'd say this was a success. Gulf Coast ranching for success and implementing Brahman in your breeding program. And so this will cover a wide variety of topics, and I want it to be very interactive. And so don't hesitate to unmute your mic or send something in the chat if you've got a question or a comment relating to some of the topics that we discuss as we move forward. And I'll try my best to answer any questions that we've got throughout the presentation, and then there at the end of the presentation when we come to it. Once again, Gulf Coast Ranching for Success. I hope y'all find this informative. And we'll just start with kind of a basic overview of some of the things that I think you need to keep in mind. My slideshow's giving me a little trouble. Hold on one second. When we're trying to keep profit at the forefront of our mindset. And so the first thing that I kind of put on this, that a lot of y'all probably know, is profit's just revenue after all expenses are paid. And so when trying to stay profitable, we have to keep outputs and inputs balanced and moving forward. The third dot, I think, is something that's very, very important that most people don't consider, or at least a lot of people don't consider. The true profitability from a cow-calf perspective is not necessarily profit per cow, but if we can start thinking from a profit and a cost per acre perspective, we can make a lot more progress improving data points and profitability within our own herds. And then the last one there that I think is key to getting everything out of your cow herd is maximizing premiums when you have a premium quality product. And so we'll get into some marketing systems, how we can help kind of lead y'all in the direction of where and how to sell your animals to get the most out of them. All right, first things, and we'll talk about finding a herd bull. And I think these are 5 important considerations when you're shopping for a bull and you're trying to make a decision on which animal you need. Not everybody needs the same bull. And I think that's something that people need to keep in mind, whether it's environment, goals, budget. Not everybody needs the same bull. And so we'll just go through what I thought were the 5 most important things to consider when selecting a herd bull. And the first and the most important one is, what do you need? And that takes into account your environment. That takes into account kind of where you're marketing and what your endpoint is and what your goals are moving forward. The next thing is you have to establish a budget. And depending on what your goals are and where you're at, your budget can be different. I will throw just a few figures at y'all that I've found to ring very, very true when it comes to deciding how much to spend on a herd bull. And basically, a lot of people have some different opinions, but 3 things that I've kind of researched and found to give y'all rough estimate value of a bull would be 3 times the value of what you can market one of his fat steers for, or 7 times the value of his feeder calves prices, or 35 times the 100-weight price at market at that point. And so with Brahman bulls staying in use a little longer, we adjusted some of those figures. But another key that I think is important to consider that maybe seems very, very small, but makes a huge difference when purchasing a bull, is for every $500 that you spend on that bull, you only need to improve weaning weights by 3 pounds on average to pay that $500. And so 10 pounds, and that justifies spending $1,500 more on your herd bull. To me, that's a big difference. But the next thing you need to study is phenotype. And notice that I put phenotype before genotype. So phenotype would be the conformation, the physical appearance of that animal. And if their phenotype isn't up to par, aka their structure and their functionality, then that genotype is really useless to us. And so we've got to make sure we're selecting cattle that meet our criteria as far as functionality and the right phenotype. We study their genotype too, right? And so that's their pedigree. We want to consider sire, dam, ancestry, and we also need to keep in mind their EPDs and their own personal performance records. And we'll really dive into that as we continue further into this slide set. And then the last thing that we'll mention here is where you're buying your stock from. And you need to find a respected seed stock source. You need to find somebody that you can trust and has put in the work and the commitment to getting accurate records culling animals when they need to be culled, and that will serve you so much benefit as you move forward into long-term profitability. Next slide, if it'll skip, I'm trying here. Okay, so wanted to talk about a few things, and one thing that we want to talk about is why buy a registered bull? Because here at BRC and me myself, I think that this is key, and we need to be turning out registered bulls on our cattle. And a few of the reasons: one is you have confidence in that pedigree, you have confidence in the accuracy of that pedigree and that animal coming from a consistent lineage that's going to work. The next thing is you have a more consistent type, right? And so crossbred bulls have so much variation. But when you get a registered purebred bull, whether it's Brahman or Angus or Hereford, you can expect much more consistency in his calf crop in that sire group because of the more consistent type that comes along with buying a registered bull. And then the third thing that I think is key is you have the ability to access pedigree information, that individual's EPDs and economic data, and overall just their own particular performance that you can apply when making mating decisions, but more importantly, helping with your purchasing power and finding the right bull for your operation. Okay, the importance of purchasing an animal with the pedigree. And so we'll move into that real briefly, and we'll just kind of skip through some of these things. But the biggest thing is you need to know who's sire and dam are when you're selecting a bull. Because that has a huge impact on overall breeding value. Same thing with why we would need to buy registered stock that are registered within a particular breed registry. And so we've got the ABBA logo here. And this isn't necessarily just an all Brahman promotion, but for the sake of Gulf Coast ranching, I think this is kind of one to really spend some time discussing. But the ABBA, what they do for you is not only do they help with promotion and marketing of those individual animals, but then we are also able to access a very, very vast database. And y'all saw, if anybody logged on from my talk over Digital Beef, there's some extensive information that you gain by spending the money and making sure that you're buying a registered bull, and specifically from the ABBA, or excuse me, from a Brahman producer. We can move on into some further discussions of the benefits of buying animals that are registered within a breed association. And one of those is that we get the benefit of having EPDs. And so linear unbiased prediction, that's just fancy words for we get EPDs, numerical information that we can apply to help make progress in our breeding decisions and mating animals that are complementary of each other. And so when we get these EPDs, we see it as a singular number or list of 20 numbers. But what we don't know is that the database that these numbers are generated from is thousands and thousands of numbers just to get that one particular figure. And so it's something that us as producers would not be able to do on our own. And we need a breed association to help put those numbers together with their genotype and kind of help us move forward. Okay, why Brahman? And I think a lot of people that have signed on to this already know the benefits that Brahman bring forth to the Gulf Coast in helping ranchers maintain profitability. But we'll just talk through a few of them. The big one: heat tolerance, insect resistance, and just overall adaptability to a more Gulf Coast type environment or a tropical and subtropical environment. I know we have some people signed on that maybe aren't living on the Gulf Coast, but still see the benefit of Brahmans. The next one is a huge one, and it's undisputed that Brahman cattle are the #1 breed to go to for hybrid vigor. And we'll talk about what that means and why they are the #1 breed for heterosis or hybrid vigor. But that is a fact that we'll spend some time discussing. Also, the natural mothering ability, and Brahmans were originally built as a very strong maternal breed, and that's still something that holds true. Longevity, we'll talk about the added benefit that you get from having Brahman in terms of long-term cow utility and their ability to stay within the herd. Increased muscle mass, volume, carcass improvement, docility. There's a few things that we'll talk about that Brahman can do for you. All right, we'll talk about Brahmans in terms of them improving heat tolerance. Okay, and many of us know that they're obviously very, very tough and can handle some heat. But a few of the reasons, one is their hair coat's naturally built to reflect the sun's rays. And so instead of bringing in extra heat, like maybe a black-hided animal that's got a lot of hair will do, they actually expel the heat naturally. Another thing that they do as a benefit is they are the breed that has the most sweat glands, and they can sweat freely and create kind of their own convection cooling to help those animals stay comfortable even as temperatures get elevated. And so when maybe somebody else's bull is laid up under a tree, the Brahman bull is out servicing cows because he can handle that elevated temperature. And the last thing is, the distinct looseness of skin or looser hided kind of a look that we associate with Brahmins. And that's not just by chance. That's natural selection that has created that animal to have more surface area to naturally expel heat. And so those Brahmins are just quite a bit tougher in hot tropical type environments. All right, let's jump into this hybrid vigor topic. And I know that a lot of people are familiar with hybrid vigor, but maybe some of you are not. And as the old saying goes, and I'm sure some of y'all have seen it, hybrid vigor or heterosis is the only thing you get for free in the cattle business. And it's a naturally occurring thing where when you breed two animals of breeds that are very distinctively different, specifically Brahman to maybe a British breed. And so those breeds are as far away from each other in terms of ancestry and type as you could possibly get. And what happens is you get a spike in performance because they are increasing the number of heterozygous traits, right? And so basically the definition of hybrid vigor is when the crossbred offspring outperforms the average of its straight bred parents. And you can see the formula there below to calculate the amount of heterosis you can expect from that particular mating scheme. But we like Brahman Hereford, we like Brahman Angus. We've seen a lot of success with Brahman Red Angus and Brahman Shorthorn. And so all of those will help get quite a bit of hybrid vigor. Next slide, if I can skip. Maternal advantages. A lot of us know the natural protective and mothering instincts that you'll find from the Brahman breed, but also good milking cows with nice udders is something that we've become accustomed to here at BRC and something that we select upon heavily. And the cow power in those females is really what makes our bull power so good. And so we're confident in the maternal advantages we find in Brahman. Brahman longevity. What can I say? To start, this cow pictured here is one that I think needs some introduction. And so this is the 175 cow that we've got in herd. And that female is 20 years old. And over the past 5 years, we've been able to not only have her calve in an acceptable interval, but more importantly, we've been able to actually back her up a month at a time. And so she's calving almost on an 11-month interval at her elevated age. And so from a production standpoint, that female is so impressive at what she's been able to do and having calves consistently year after year and raising those calves well. And so that's something that you can expect from Brahmins. And what we kind of tell people and what a lot of people I've discussed with, you can expect on average at least 5 years more out of cattle with Brahman in them than say straight bred British or continental cattle. And so that's a huge benefit as we're going forward. The carcass advantage you get from Brahman. So the next couple slides we'll talk about carcass advantages and carcass quality. And so I'll just kind of get it out of the way. I know a lot of people have associated Brahmins maybe with not being the premier breed from a carcass perspective, but I'll just share a few statistics on our 805/8 female who was recently just named the international champion in Waco. So from a carcass perspective, I would consider her to be on par with the females in any breed. So she had an actual ribeye area of 16.1 and her percent IMF was 4.82%. So those statistics alone are very, very impressive. But then couple the fact that she weaned at 670 pounds and she was 1,135 pounds as a yearling. So a female that's got carcass backed in her pedigree, and that's something that we focus on improving as we move forward. And then the last thing we'll talk about is making sure that temperaments are acceptable. And anybody that's said, those Brahmins, they've got hot attitudes. We've seen some of those as well, but we've also been able to, through selection, improve docilities, and these cattle are very, very intelligent. So the way you handle and manage them also has a heavy, heavy influence on their behavior. Okay, we talked about beef quality, but just a statistic to throw out there for folks is we've been seeing 65 to 70% choice on a lot of these Brahman carcasses. And so anybody that says Brahman cattle can't grade, we've got kind of some stats to back up the contrary to that. So moving on we're going to start discussing how performance testing can help you in making your cattle better. And big, bold, white letters on the left side of the screen: be hard on your cattle. If you're not hard on your own cattle, you can't make improvements. Here we call for fertility issues. If you've got an udder problem, you're not going to stay in the cow herd for long. And feet and leg soundness is something that specifically hoof shape and quality, any issue there is not accepted. And so those animals need to be eliminated from the breeding herd. Also, bulls that don't meet the standards in terms of birth weight and from a phenotype perspective that we don't think or of quality to go on a customer's cow herd, those bulls are castrated. They're put in a branded beef program. And that's the only way that you can make improvements is through proper selection. Okay, something that's huge, and I think this might be some of the more interesting topics of discussion that we've got in this slide set, and so I hope that y'all find this interesting, is our partnership with Zoetis, Brahman Country Genetics, to bring genomically enhanced EPDs to the Brahman breed. And so for those that are familiar with genomic EPDs, breeds like Angus and Hereford have been using this for quite some time with a lot of success, and we're very excited about what it can do to help us move our EPDs and our accuracy values and just totally assist with how we're mating these animals going forward. And so I'll just talk with you kind of what it means. And so what we do is we'll take DNA on each animal. Not only do we take DNA, but we're also going to take records. And with that DNA, not to sound too over the top, but there's a chip that takes that DNA and runs markers on 50,000 locations to associate these genes with their individual performance. And so what we can do is we can combine their actual genes with their performance, and we can come up with the genomically enhanced EPD. And what these EPDs do is they allow us to make very confident decisions in that animal's breeding value much, much sooner. And so depending on the trait, there's a lot of variability. But basically what this does is I can turn out a virgin bull and be just as confident in the accuracy of his birth weight EPD as I would be in a bull who sired 16 calves. So think about that from just a confidence and kind of a worry-free calving season when you know that your bull who's never bred a cow has the same accuracy value of his birth weights as one who's bred 16. Okay, and then we'll just put see if we can skip forward, an example of how this can help us. Okay, so this is just an example I put together to share with y'all, but we have 5 flush mate bulls. Okay, the day they're born, outside of a few adjustments from performance, their EPDs are going to be exactly the same, right? So we'll plug in their individual information, but in general, those animals' EPDs are going to be exactly the same or very, very close. Once we've collected that DNA and we've run it with their performance, their pedigree, coupled it with their genotype, we are able to come up with an EPD value, and we're allowing ourselves to make decisions on which one of those bulls is going to have more breeding value, basically, before they've ever even sired a calf. Few numbers or dollar values that I think really sink in kind of how important genomic enhanced EPDs are. So with the Angus Association, they estimated that it would cost you $1,300 to feed out a bull and get the same feed intake information that you can get from running these genomic EPDs. It would also cost you $700 to obtain the carcass information to get the same accuracy values that you would just from taking blood and turning in that DNA sample. Plus, it's going to take you about 3 years worth of time to get that number when I had that number the day that that animal's DNA was submitted. And so huge benefit if you use these tools appropriately. Performance testing. And so I'm sure many of y'all know the benefit of performance testing, but we take tests at birth for calf vigor, calving ease, that cow's mothering ability and udder score, teat score, and disposition. And so the day that calf is born, we've already got information compiled. And the day that calf is born, we could already know whether he's going to stay intact as a bull or whether that one needs to go ahead and enter our steer program. And so that's another way that we enhance selection and making sure that we're improving calf vigor, calving ease, and cow dispositions at calving time is by removing those animals from the breeding population. As they age, we'll take weaning measurements at that particular weight day, and then we'll go on and we'll collect yearling weight data. And at that time, we'll also take ultrasound information for ribeye area and marbling to help producers make decisions when they're selecting bulls to improve carcass quality. Okay, we'll walk through just a few ways that you can market your cattle in hopes that we can help you make the most money for the product that you've got. And the first way is the most common way, and that's just marketing cattle at your local auction barn. Now, what does that do for you as far as helping you make profit? Well, one thing is it's a competitive bidding environment. It's very transparent. What they sell for is what they sell for, and you're in and out in a very convenient manner. Also, those are open 48 to 50 weeks a year. So most of the time you can take cattle to a sell barn. They're all over the place and you can get money for your calf. The problem is you have no control over their price. And if you are making animals that have a superior phenotype, genotype, they're performing very well, those animals do not get rewarded from a financial perspective. And so we've got to make sure if we're marketing cattle at a local auction barn that you're not expecting premiums for maybe purchasing bulls of higher value. Another way, and I like the little handshake we've got here, that's marketing on a contract. And if you've got enough calves in a group, you can very easily get somebody interested in marketing these calves on contract. The biggest benefit of marketing cattle on contract is you lock in a price. You can get a price that you're comfortable with and that you're profitable at, and you can lock in that price. It's also very easy. Those cattle don't have to worry about as much stress in that situation. The only problems are you remove competition from the equation. And so competition springs maybe an increase in price. Also, if the market price goes up, but you've already locked in your contract, you're not going to benefit from that increase in dollar value. The next one's big, and we've found a lot of success in this method, and I think producers can implement it if they have the availability to get customers there in front of their cattle, and that's private treaty. Okay, and the benefits of private treaty, one is the seller is completely in control of the market and the price, right? You set the price, they can take it or they can leave it, but that's a number that you're comfortable with. The next form or benefit there, I guess I should say, is that it's the cheapest method, right? It doesn't cost anything to have a private treaty group. People can come through and look at their leisure. Those animals are fresh, they're stress-free. It's the easiest on the cattle. It's really pretty comfortable for the producer too. And so there's some things there that are of benefit. The issues with private treaty, and I will say, the first one is if you can't get customers by your place to look at the cattle, it's very hard to sell them private treaty. The other things are stuff you don't think about. Producer inherits the risk of having to collect payment. Okay, and so when you sell them online, that's somebody else's job. When you sell them private treaty, you have to collect payment. Okay, and you have to do all the marketing, and there's a lot less competition that way. The next way, video and online auction. I'll say the biggest benefit of a video or an online auction is that is how you get the most eyes on your cattle. You get those cattle in front of the most buyers. And I'll say it's surprising to me how many people are purchasing cattle on these video and online auctions that maybe haven't seen them in person. And so if you're a producer thinking about having a sale, it really your market to a lot more people in a lot of different places. It's also a very competitive bidding format. Okay. And I mean, in reality, it's just the easiest for the buyer. They can log in, they can click their bid. It's a very laid back setting. And then the last two kind of negatives when it comes to an online auction is you have higher marketing costs and you don't get to see the cattle in person. Retained ownership. Okay, and so just to briefly run that down for people listening, retained ownership, what I mean by that is when you own the calf from the day that you made that mating all the way through the entire feeding phase, and then you own them all the way up onto the rail and basically into a carcass. And so the benefit of that is if you're making selection on carcass value, you're making sure the bulls you turn out have growth and performance and they're going to marble. Okay, then this is a great way to market your calves. The problem is in this situation, you are running the risk and you will inherit any kind of risk that is associated with those cattle underperforming in terms of carcass quality and how they run on the rail. The other thing is you will receive all of the risk relating to market changes and you will have increased inputs. And so at the end of the day, you can make much more profit when you retain ownership, but you are also setting yourself up in a situation where you could potentially have more loss. So that's something to weigh out and consider before you make decisions on feeding cattle and sending them to the feed yard. A couple that have become very, very popular in recent years. One's a branded beef program, and we've got our own branded beef program here in Brahman Country Beef. The things that I see benefit of is you are at the control of the price all the way through the feeding phase into the carcass phase and the end product. And so you're cutting out a lot of middlemen when you do this. The other thing is that you're getting premiums. Most likely, if you have a branded beef program, you put that together because you think that people will pay extra for that product. The problem is you're going to have more inputs, and not all animals are going to meet the specs that it takes to fall into this branded beef program. And so just because you want it to be certified Angus beef or Brahman country beef doesn't necessarily mean that's where they're going to end up. The last one is something that we've seen in COVID times, and shutdown has made this a huge part of the industry, and that's the new farm to table industry that we've seen a big push in. What that does is basically people like to know where their food comes from. So that allows people in a local area to purchase locally raised product from a source that they trust. Once again, you eliminate middlemen, you cut out people that are making profit just for handling that product for a short amount of time. The catch with this, and something that you need to be aware of before you jump headfirst into a farm to table production system, is that you're going to have more inputs. You're going to have to feed those cattle, you're going to have to pay for the harvest, and then you're going to have to market the product. Okay, and so those are three things that you have to consider before deciding, because the premiums that you see people talk about at the end for these products is very, very impressive, but you have to keep in mind the inputs are also the highest. Okay, we've moved on into a different topic of discussion. We're basing back towards profitability and making sure that we're selecting cattle that are profitable. Here's just a little fact, I guess, or a little graphic that maybe can help you understand. But we're comparing reproduction, we're comparing growth, and ultimately end product value. And then we're comparing it to how the impact is on economic value. And reproduction versus growth versus end product falls at a 2-to-1-to-1 ratio. So basically, you can focus on growth, you can focus on carcass all day, but reproductive value, so fertility, getting cows bred, getting calves alive and on the ground, has twice the economic impact as both of those others. So make sure that you're choosing animals with a track record for being fertile, for having high reproductive rates, bulls that are going to get cows bred, because that's really what's going to impact profitability long term. Another thing, I'm going to define two terms for you that I think can help you when you're making mating decisions. You need to know what heritability is, you need to know what heterosis is, and you need to know how they impact each other. So heritability, basic, just very, very easy to understand definition, is how much is the difference in the genes expressed in difference in phenotype. Okay. And then heterosis is when the performance, like I talked about, of a crossbred outperforms the average of its parents that are both purebreds. Okay. And here's a nice little graphic that can help you maybe deciding what to select upon and how to implement these things in your breeding system. And so we've got a column for fertility, growth, and product. And these traits, well, basically heritability and heterosis, for lack of a better way of putting it, are completely inversely related. So low heritability traits are high in heterosis, okay? And then high heritability traits are low in heterosis. So what that is basically telling me is if you want to improve fertility in a commercial cow-calf operation, the best way to do it is making hybrid stock and capitalizing on heterosis. If you want to improve product, okay, those are high heritability traits. And so if we select upon animals that are performing well in their product predictors like ribeye area and marbling, okay, and they have high accuracy values, we can quickly improve those traits. And so a very interesting graphic here on maybe when to use heritability and when to use heterosis to make improvements. Okay, we talked about heterosis and we've talked about how that and hybrid vigor basically mean the same thing, but that leads us into the topic of the benefit of an F1 cow. And I've seen some people that are in this group, oh, I went too far, listening, that I know raise F1s and maybe are making some Brayfords, and I'm sure they'll attest to the fact that there's no way that you can be more productive in capitalizing on free gain from hybrid vigor than having an F1 cow. And so what that does is that allows you to not only capitalize on maximum maternal heterosis. So when you have a Brahman Hereford F1 female, she is using that heterosis for a benefit to her fertility, to her milking ability, to her overall fleshing ability. So we've got 100% there. Then we bring another breed into the mix, say Charolais, and that's not a Charolais plug, I'm just throwing a breed out there, but you breed this F1 female to a Charolais bull. Now you're getting direct heterosis because the Charolais is unrelated to both breeds that are making up the F1 female, and then you're getting 100% retained maternal heterosis for a big spike in fertility, growth, and those cattle are just going to overall be more profitable. And so there's kind of the benefit of F1. Just throw a few numbers to you. So at A&M, they did a study for 10 years, and they found pregnancy rates were improved by 16% in those F1s versus their purebred counterparts. Also, they looked at over 4 years of improved lifespan in those F1s versus, so an F1 Hereford or an F1 Angus versus their purebred counterparts. And so that's a big boost on profitability. And then the last one, I think, kind of hammers home the concept of their value. So in the Houston commercial female sale, a Brahman F1 female was $200 over the price of any other breed or breed combination in that sale. And the ABBA has really embraced making F1. So has the Hereford Association. So has the Angus Association. They've worked together to do research and compile data that show that this is the way to go from a cow-calf perspective. But the ABBA has a certified and a golden certified F1 program that allows you to run these animals through a registry and collect and compile genetic and performance information on them. Okay, now, how do you make your F1s? There's different ways to make your F1s, and I'm sure everybody's got their opinion on which one's better. I'll just tell you what I see as benefits of both in the reciprocal cross. And so one way, obviously, is to turn a Brahman bull out on your British-based cows, or maybe they're continental cows, to make an F1. The benefit there, that Brahman bull is more adapted to the environment. He's going to more effectively cover cows when maybe the temperature in the land are making it just a little harder on maybe an Angus bull in that same situation. Another thing, so these British cows that we see a lot in these F1 breeding programs are quiet. A lot of times they're pretty easy to handle, and they're lower input type cattle. And so from an input perspective, we're maybe putting a little less money in those cows. And then you capitalize on those British cows being very, very maternal, having good milking ability and kind of the natural ability to raise a calf. The problem, okay, and both of these have problems and benefits. The problem with this F1 mating system is those cows are not as adapted to the area. And so you have to, as a rancher, as somebody making these mating decisions, you're going to have to amp up your management game and be just a little more intense from a herd health perspective to make sure that we're capitalizing on the genetics that we're using. The other thing, a lot of people are familiar with it, maybe some of you aren't, of the spike in birth weight we see from the Brahman sired F1 reciprocal crosses. And so you'll expect those bull calves out of this mating to be 5 to 10 pounds heavier than their counterparts of breeding a Hereford bull to a Brahman cow. So there's just kind of something to consider. And that's why when someone comes by to look for a Brahman bull to breed the British cows here at the ranch, we lean them towards those lower birth weight options to reduce any kind of dystocia. The next option is the Brahman mothered F1. Okay, and so with these Brahman mothered F1s, we're going to focus on the fact that those cows are more fit for the environment, right? And so you turn out one bull to say 30 cows. So we have to worry about one animal that's not quite as fit for the environment instead of the 30. So they're tougher when it comes to internal and external parasites. They fight off foot rot and pink eye just a little better than some of those British breeds in this environment on average. Okay, the other thing is we're limiting some of those birth weight and calving problems that we see maybe in the other mating scheme. And if you're choosing the appropriate bull, it's not an issue at all, but that's something to make sure that you're paying attention to. The next thing that's of a positive is these Brahman cows are maternal, they're protective, they do a nice job raising those calves. Okay, the two things that I would say to watch when you're making this mating decision is these Brahman cows are going to have a little more size. So you're going to have to make sure that you find a British bull with enough frame to effectively cover those cows. And so I know some people that I've talked to have had trouble maybe finding a Hereford bull that can get some of their a little framier Brahman cows covered in bred. And so that's something to keep in mind. And the second thing is those cows being just maybe a skosh bigger, you're going to have a little more inputs. So you're going to have more output. Those bigger cows are going to raise bigger calves, but they're going to cost just a little bit more to get them there. And so it's something to weigh out. Okay. Using EPDs. This is huge. If you want to be progressive and embrace technology, we've got to use EPDs in our selection criteria moving forward. So EPD, expected progeny difference, what it basically is it's a numerical value that's given to you after they've taken three things: information on pedigree, performance, and progeny records. So the three P's are what it takes to make up an EPD. So that animal's pedigree, aka his sire and dam, their genetic impact is going to affect that animal's EPD. His individual performance, right? So his own birth weight, his own weaning weight, his own yearling weight, those are ultimately going to affect his EPD. And then as he sires calves or a cow has calves, that's also going to affect that numerical value and ultimately benefit. As we continue to collect progeny records, we're going to benefit from increased accuracy values, and those EPDs are going to get quite a bit more trustworthy. Okay, so we've got a list of EPD traits the Brahman Association and most breed associations offer to you, and I'll just talk about what you want to select on, right? So birth weight, we're obviously going to select on lighter birth weights. Be cognitive that a lot of times we associate maybe some trouble with calf vigor from really decreasing those birth weights. And so there's a happy point where, you know, that 60, 65 pounds is plenty good. Weaning weight, we're going to select on extra weaning weight, right? So we want that number to be high. Yearling weight, we want that to be high. The milk one is one of the most difficult to define. Everybody's environment's going to affect how much milk those cows can handle differently. So maybe if you have the availability of really high quality forages, you can supplement those cows, then a high milking cow is going to be very profitable. If you're in eastern New Mexico and forage is low, those animals are not going to get a high nutritional plane. We need to focus on making sure that they have a lower milk figure to meet that environment's demands. The next thing, tenderness. And so we select on the lower tenderness score. And the reason being is you would think high, but tenderness is measured in shear force. And so a lower tenderness number means it took less weight to shear that cut of meat in half. And so basically that meat is more tender because it took less shear force. The next one, ribeye area. Obviously we want big ribeyes. We want a high total maternal. We want marbling to be high. We want scrotal circumference to be high. Docility, obviously we want high. Yield grade, One of those weird ones, we actually want yield grade low, right? Because a lower numerical yield grade, aka a yield grade 1, is much more appealing than a yield grade 5. Carcass weight high, fat thickness low also. So we want those cattle to marble and do so without excessive fat thickness. Two things that I think are game changers in the cattle industry, and specifically in the Brahman breed, are these two bioeconomic indexes. And so what indexes are is they're a dollar figure basically that they've come up with after compiling multiple EPDs into one easy to use number, right? And so ranchers, cowmen, those numbers can get kind of confusing at times, but if we give you one number that defines kind of what you're trying to do, it makes it a whole lot easier to categorize, use the numbers, and decide on which animal you want to use. And so in the Brahman Association, we've got the dollar queen index and the dollar bull index, and they are exactly what you kind of think. The dollar queen implies that that's going to make productive cows. Dollar bull, those are bulls that are going to be profitable in both the seed stock and commercial cattle sector. Okay, and so a couple things I'll note about dollar queen. Obviously, it's talking about a cow being a good replacement female. And so all in all, animals with high dollar queen values should be expected to be really profitable and productive cows. Two things I will say that Brahman did a good job of putting in this dollar queen value is dollar queen will not increase frame or milk. So when you're selecting on dollar queen, it won't make the cows bigger and it won't make them any heavier milking. And that's kind of how they've allowed to improve cows without maybe making them a little higher input, right? So we make them milk heavy, we make them big framed, they're going to cost more. And so dollar queen doesn't necessarily do that. Dollar bulls are terminal index. Okay. And so it will add frame. And this one's heavily based on weight measurements, growth, scrotal circumference, and then two big ones, docility and carcass traits. And so use dollar bull if you're trying to improve the quality of your herd sires. You're trying to make some very, very strong terminal progeny. Look at dollar bull. It's a very, very consolidated figure that can help you moving forward. Okay, we're winding down, but just a couple of things. If you need proof that EPDs work, go look at the Digital Beef website and you can see an EPD graph that shows the changes in values over time. We've made cattle perform significantly better through EPD selection, and many of the values have literally tripled in 20 years. So EPDs work whether people believe it or not, and that's not to say it'll ever replace selection on phenotype. You've got to like the animal's phenotype, but EPDs are a tool that can help ranchers be more profitable. Okay, a couple more things. And so if we want to be an effective rancher in a Gulf Coast environment, we're going to have to do a few things. And one of those that's huge is we're going to have to control animal health. Down here, we have to deal with things and issues that ranchers in other places don't have to deal with. And that's not to say that sometimes they have it harder than we do, but there's just some interesting things that we've got to factor in. One of which is we've got to select cattle that are naturally resistant to parasites and insects. No, there's no doubt that zebu breeds, and specifically Brahman cattle, are the best at that. They're the most naturally resistant to insect and parasites. And so we will be talking about intestinal worms. I'm talking about flies and ticks and gnats and things like that. Okay. We've also got to implement and stay very, very strict on our vaccination and deworming protocols. If we're going to make sure we stay ahead of the curve and eliminate death loss, revenue loss due to those cows not performing to their max potential, we need to vaccinate, we need to deworm at the appropriate times and the appropriate amount. And then the next thing is huge. People don't consider it, but if those animals are not nutritionally where they need to be, they will not have the proper immune response. And so we have to make sure nutritionally, whether that's supplementing at certain times of the year where our grass isn't quite strong enough, or that's sorting the first calf heifers and after they've calved, giving them a little assistance, whatever it might be, creep feeding calves, we need to make sure their plane of nutrition is appropriate to allow for the ideal immune response and make those cattle just a little tougher to disease. And the last thing is the best way to make sure your cattle are A, fertile, but B, resist disease and parasites, crossbreeding. Heterosis will affect their ability to fight off disease and internal parasites. And so if we crossbreed these cattle, we're able to basically get kind of nature's free way of deworming those cows, or at least making them tougher. Anybody that's raised tiger striped F1s know that those will be the fattest cows that you've got in the pasture, and they're naturally just really tough. Okay, so sum it up. One thing, the key to ranching success on the Gulf Coast is implementing some form of Brahman in your cow herd, and there's really no way around it, in my opinion, to stay profitable and ahead of the curve in this area of the world. Brahman cattle are necessary to make your cows reach where they need to be from a profitability perspective. Okay. And why here at BRC we think we can help you is, first and foremost, we're raising Brahman seed stock that are backed by people that will stand behind the cattle. And these cattle are performance tested stringently. If they don't meet performance testing demands, they're cold. Same with birth weight, structure issues, maybe an udder issue. If those cattle don't meet where we want them to be from a phenotype perspective, they're cold. And then they're backed by genomics, they're backed by carcass measurements, and some really, really good cow families. And so that's where we think BRC can benefit you. And I'll leave you with just a quote from Bonsma. If anybody's familiar with him, a livestock enthusiast, a very, very smart man that spent some time as a guest lecturer at Texas A&M. And he said, in livestock philosophy, man is the most important environmental factor. And so you can do a lot to improve your cow herd's efficiency through the proper management. But if you have any questions or you need anything, you can contact me at Keaton@brcouture.com.